Hey, good morning. It's episode 10 of Camellia City. I'm Danan. I'm just going to have a really short podcast today about something I thought was really interesting about this magical, beautiful town of Greenville, Alabama. And that is, we were the site of a German POW camp during World War II. Not a lot of people know that. And I'm going to take some information from a website and from a book. It's a memoir, actually, written by Clifton Metter about growing up in Greenville, Alabama during that time. He was a young man, and also some stories I've heard personally from someone who lives here in Greenville, Alabama. Okay, so let me set this up for you. In Clifton Metter's book, Sketches of a Small Town, circa 1940, which is about growing up in Greenville, Alabama, he says, when talking about World War II, it all started for me one chilly Sunday afternoon as I pedaled my bike back from throwing footballs with Charles. Daddy had finally persuaded Mother to relinquish her no playing on Sundays rule. I think he warned her she was raising a sissy if she didn't let up. I had turned 10 in September, and that day my brother Dan was turning 15. The date was December the 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day. As usual, we had gone to Sunday school and then to the morning church service. That afternoon, as I pedaled my bike toward home, I saw a woman in the distance come out on her front porch and start waving her arms and yelling. I couldn't understand what she was saying. When I got closer, I heard, "It's the Japs! The Japs! Bomb Pearl Harbor! Sneak attack!" She kept screaming these words, announcing it to her world with no one to listen but me. I waved at her and raced home to find Mama, Daddy, and Dan huddled around the radio in our living room. Okay, I just want to say, that the Japs comment is in quotes because I know that's not a very nice thing to say. So he talks about how they listened around the radio to what was happening during Pearl Harbor. A terrifying time, if you can just imagine that. Maybe even, those of us who lived through 9/11, also a terrifying time. But in some ways, Pearl Harbor, was us getting into a world war where so many more people died. And I just can't imagine, the beginning of that as experienced in a tiny town like Greenville, Alabama at the time. Okay, so he talks about after Pearl Harbor, gasoline was rationed by the summer of 42. Each car had an A, B, or C sticker on the windshield. The majority of cars sported A stickers, which meant they were only allowed 4 gallons of gas a week. So you can imagine, Mr. Spock's very excited about this story. Sorry. You can imagine, only being allowed to get 4 gallons of gas a week, how that would limit us today. At 25 cents a gallon, that came to $1 a week. Daddy got preferential C sticker because his job required both train and car travel. Soon, meat and butter were rationed, then coffee, then sugar. As a young boy, I missed chewing gum and candy the most due to sugar rationing. I never did figure out what chewing gum did for the war effort. Women complained about the absence of silk hosiery. Dress shirts also disappeared and cigarettes became scarce. And by the way, a lady from Greenville, Alabama told me that she was a teenager during World War II here in Greenville, and she said that the girls, because they couldn't get hosiery, pantyhose, and pantyhose were made with seams in the back. And so they would take an eyeliner pencil and draw a black seam down the back of their legs to make it look like they were wearing hose. Pretty much anything you could think of was in short supply, being redirected to the war. By early 42, we began to practice air raid drills for both day and nighttime attacks, at first nearly every month. Daddy was the air raid warden for about 2 blocks. He had a helmet and an armband. Dan was his assistant warden, and he got a helmet and an armband too. I envied that. At night, when the air raid siren sounded, Mama and I sat in the dark living room and waited until the all-clear siren sounded. So, okay, imagine this, that you're having to practice now. An air raid is being bombed, and the people of this town had to be prepared for being bombed. We don't think about that today. Daddy went from house to house getting the neighbors to draw their shades or turn out their lights. At school, when the siren sounded for the drill, we had to climb under our desks and duck our heads to the floor. Okay, so he talks about it was still far removed, even though they were practicing these air raid drills. And one of the things that brought the war really closer to Greenville, Alabama, was the sinking of a German submarine in the Gulf of Mexico, which I didn't really know that happened. So that raised anxiety levels in town for sure. And then, here's where we get to the prisoner of war camp. 1944, the government built a German prisoner of war camp a few miles north of town. Okay, this is where, for you Greenville people, this is where the Department of Transportation is today. It housed around 100 German POWs. These men were put to work clearing underbrush and cutting timber in the large pine forest south of town near Chapman. So every weekday, their caravan of open-bodied trucks passed through the streets of Greenville. We loved to stand at attention as the trucks passed by and mimic the Heil Hitler salutes we saw in the war movies and the newsreels. The POWs laughed and waved and often threw German magazines and books to us. Somehow we did not harbor the same hatred for the Germans that we did for the Japanese. But I just want to say that later on, this is when we weren't really aware of what was happening in Germany to the Jews at the concentration camps. When Americans did find out about that, then, it was a different story. So at this point in the war, not a lot of people are aware of what was happening, in Germany, with the Nazis. So here we are, Greenville, Alabama, open trucks. German soldiers are coming through, and I'm going to tell you where those German soldiers are from. But first, let me just say I spoke with another lady from Greenville, Alabama, who told me that when she was a young girl, they would, she and her friends would position themselves somewhere so they could see these trucks going down Commerce Street. Yes, they would parade them down Commerce Street on their way to work in Chapman. Now, these guys were working at these mills or cutting trees it still goes on today, at places like Coastal or, I don't even know all these places are called, but we have a forestry center here, and there's a lot of wood production going on here, and it was the same, and the POWs would work there. And she said that the girls thought they were so good looking that they would come out to see them and see the gorgeous German soldiers going by. Now, she was a young lady, and also not, these are children at the time, so they weren't really aware of the dangers and who these people were and the scariness of what was actually happening in war. So yeah, we had German POWs going through town every day on their way to work and being housed right outside of town. So Clifton Metters says his brother Dan, who was now at the time 17, had acquired a fake German accent from watching all the war movies. So one night, he and a group of his buddies had the insane idea to drive up to the POW camp and call out in a German accent to the guards. So they pulled up to the secured area, and in his best accent, Dan asked permission to visit one of the POWs. "We are here to see Herr Frederick from von Jungermann," Dan yelled. Will you bring Herr von Jungermann to the gate? So, of course, the searchlights flooded the car, sirens sounded, armed guards swarmed around them, demanding everyone get out with the hands up, lie face down on the ground. Finding out it was a hoax, the commander of the prison camp telephoned the chief of police, Mr. Gus, who was more than happy to deliver the errant boys back to their angry parents. Dan lost driving privileges for a long time, but he got a lot of mileage out of the story. It made him a celebrity at school, with everybody asking him to tell it over and over again. And each time the tale got more colorful. So that's a personal account of what happened, and let me just give you some details, to know that in Alabama, and by the way, in the U.S., over 500,000 German POWs came over to camps here. And the reason why is because these were German POWs from Africa. They were from the African war effort, German and Italian. In Alabama, there were about 16,000 German prisoners of war housed. And like I said, in Greenville, there about 100. There were 24 camps in Alabama, and Greenville housed about 100 of these guys. And that was from them being captured in North Africa. And so some of these prisoners of war were also from North Africa. They had been conscripted into those armies after, they took over those countries. But most of them were indeed German here in Greenville. So, these camps had to follow the Geneva Convention, so they were treated very well, very well. They were paid for their work. They were entertained. They were fed. They had recreational events at the camp. We treated them very nicely, nicer than American soldiers were treated, I can promise you that. And actually, there were a few escape attempts, and several of those soldiers were killed. Now, I don't know if any of those escapes happened at the Greenville POW camp, but definitely in Alabama, there were some brief stints of freedom, but mostly those POWs were captured by local police and either killed or sent back to the POW camps. So, yeah, I don't know if anybody, I'm sure plenty of people knew about it, but not a lot of people my age knew that we had a POW camp here in town. And, it's kind of one of those things we should have more pictures of and talk about more. I think it's extremely interesting, and I didn't know the war came so close to this little town. In fact, the fear that everyone lived through. Now, I remember my grandparents talking about the rationing, and there was we don't think about that these days, and I wonder how we would act if there was rationing again. I don't think we would. I'm going to take that back. Maybe not. Maybe we would be I'm hoping we would be as accommodating and we would figure out a way to thrive and survive and be patriots and hopefully we'll not, my prayer is that never happens again, for obvious reasons. So, I just thought this was an interesting story to share during this Thanksgiving week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would love to, if you would add any of your comments or stories you've heard from your grandparents or parents or pictures. Once I post this podcast up, I would love for you to share those. Okay, so I'm going to go have a great week, and I hope you do as well. Thank you for listening to Camellia City, and I'll see you next time. I love you. Mwah!